Dear friends, dear panelists, dear guests, welcome to the live part of today's event. I hope that you all hear me well. I'm glad that I have this opportunity to welcome you to this panel. I'm greeting all the participants both in US and in Slovenia. Dober večer, good afternoon. I would like to start with thanking Tay. Tay did a great job in organizing the whole conference and bringing us all together. And the idea was, the plan was to be all together at the beautiful Bed Lake, but we will have to postpone that to near, I hope, future, when Tay, I'm sure, will organize not only that, but as we heard before, we have some new challenges now. We have to welcome our friends from United States to Slovenia to see some of our breweries. We have some excellent craft beer, so you will be welcomed. I'm sure that Tay will organize that as well. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to lead this panel. Now I would like to greet our panelists, just to be sure that we are all here and we all hear each other. So today with us, our first four panelists, gospod Andrej Orožen, direktor Devasofta. Dober večer.
Ja, dobro večer, pozdravljeni.
Odlično se slišimo. Then Kenary, director of Harpoon Brewery.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, and I look forward to having some of that great Slovenian beer as soon as I can.
Good afternoon, Dan. Welcome. Mr. Christopher Mackin. Chris, do you hear us? Chris is president of Ownership Associations.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. And David Ellerman, our Slovenian American. David, do you hear us?
I do.
Yes, excellent. So we hear you. David is, as you all know, president of the Institute for Economic Democracy, and he is actually initially responsible for much of these connections of ours, and basically responsible in a way for this conference going on as well. So thank you, David, for that. How we will proceed with the panel. So I have some questions for panelists. Then we already got some questions, as you saw, from the audience, from participants. Some more will hopefully come during the panel itself. And we have with us Tay and Gregor still here. So if you want to ask something them, that is possible as well. And of course, panelists can ask questions each other. So I will be just moderating this. We are talking English tonight. Of course, we are open and we are receiving questions in Slovene, and we will translate them to our English-speaking panelists. And of course, we will, if needed, translate their answers to Slovene if you wish us to do that. Now, I would like to pose the first round of questions, then we will go to the questions from the audience, and then we will see how much time we will have. I have another round on questions, but maybe we will have at the end to decide when to meet again and discuss the remaining questions again. So if I may start, I would like to start with David. David, you are in Slovenia art and back to Slovenia for many years. You have been observing and analyzing Slovenian economic and ownership transitions from something that was very different 30 years ago to what we have today. And I would like to ask you to tell us why do you think, if you think that legislation is like legislative framework is more likely to happen today than, I don't know, decade or more decades ago?
Well, when I first came to Slovenia, it was in 1990, and worked on the Mensinger privatization law to try to privatize to something like ESOPs then. And the general mentality was that everybody had learned about the Western economies from television, and that you get rich by playing on the stock market. So everything was delnica. So what eventually won in the privatization battle was something where people got vouchers and could then play on the stock market. And there was some more or less temporary employee ownership, but there was nothing like the ESOP trust, which made it so that ownership would be bought back by the ESOP. And so what employee ownership there was after 1990, or after the law passed several years later, it was dissipated. And but the opportunities offered by employee ownership are the same today as they were then, except that the opportunity now is more related to the succession problem and to the problem of keeping ownership in Slovenia. And for example, Domel got this very significant offer from an American company and to take over their business. And if they had accepted, they would have, within 5 years or so, they would no longer be in that small town they're in, whose name I can never remember. And I see Andrej is here too, and I think I heard Yore say the other day that you get an offer almost every month and you don't even bother to look at the terms anymore. And so employee ownership is a way to anchor that company, that capital, those jobs, the tax revenues and so forth in a community so that it stays there. And that's very important in Slovenia. In Slovenia, there was this idea that foreign ownership would solve all the problems of business. And that hasn't turned out to be true. And we have some rather famous examples of companies that went into foreign ownership and were eventually shut down. The Audrey Airways being the main one that was bought by a private equity firm essentially, and then just milked of its capital until it collapsed several years later. So the interest in employee ownership in solving these various problems of anchoring the capital in the community, rewarding the employees, not thinking that foreign ownership is going to solve all your problems. I see high-tech companies like DeweySoft and others solving problems outside. There's no lack of that sort of skill in Slovenia. So we're trying to take the American experience, which has been very significant, you heard from Dan and Chris, and adapt it to the Slovene legal situation and also make some improvements. And I mentioned the improvements in my talk, the not waiting until retirement to start to see the money, to have the shares sort of roll over in a 5 to 8 year period, and to make the ESOP itself more accommodating to ownership, where people can be involved there, and then that anticipates their involvement in the company itself. So that's some of the improvements that we're making, and we're certainly emphasizing the aspect of the American ESOP that everybody's involved. It's not something where the white collar workers will get ownership and the blue collar workers will not, and that's a very unusual aspect of the American ESOP, and we appreciate it, and we will have that feature also in the Slovene version.
Thank you very much, David. We are now in the process, as you just said, of pushing forward a certain type of legislation. Now, this experience from America could help us. Chris, you were saying that in the 70s, it was a political story, a battle that had to be won. And I'm wondering, can you remember and tell us who were the main what were the main obstacles, or who was the main opposition in that time to the ESOP legislation?
Well,
I'm asking Chris now, David.
sure. So it's an interesting story because, frankly, there was not much opposition at all. It wasn't a battle. There was the lead actor, the lead person was Senator Russell Long of Louisiana, who is the son of a famous Louisiana politician who was known to be a populist and who was not happy with the economy and the fairness of the economy back in the 1930s. This was his son in the 70s and 80s who reached back to his father's populism. But this gentleman, Senator Russell Long, was much more centrist and had good relationships with Republicans and with Democrats, and was smart enough to appeal to both sides of the aisle, if you will, and see how shared ownership can connect to American Republican values of self-reliance and responsibility, as well as to democratic values of fairness and justice. And he was himself a Democrat, and he was a very persuasive man. And because he was able to talk to both sides of the aisle and find values that would connect to both sides of the aisle, he didn't meet much opposition. So it was not so much a fight as it was an act of sort of finding the right cultural keys, the right cultural locks to unlock to get to have a good constructive conversation about how to make a better economy.
Thank you very much. Then it was really inspiring listening to you and your colleague Jamie talking about the connection of already existing employee commitment and culture in your brewery prior to introduction of the ESOP, but also the sense of mission and continuous improvement in engaging employees in the business battle through use and building of ownership culture. This, as you said, takes time and effort. Can you share with us a little bit more about what you are doing, how you are investing in this ownership culture? What kind of education? What are you doing?
Absolutely.
How much are you doing?
Absolutely.
Please.
I would say to Chris, my gosh, the way you just described the legislation passing, if we could only dream today that people would act in the same manner. We are in a very tough time politically in our country, as I think you probably know. You know, we have tried to embed or drive the ESOP and ownership culture really into every part of our business. So we have an employee communication committee that meets every month that has about 12 members from around the company. We have 150 total employees representing all different parts of the company. They have programs that go on all year. The highlight of it is this month, which is Employee Ownership Month in the United States. One thing we're doing, we have 5 different brands at our brewery. Each week of this month, we're highlighting one of our brands in different ways, and the Employee Ownership Committee is driving that process. We have an education component to it. I think the main thing that I do is that I talk about employee ownership really at every opportunity that I get when I'm speaking to managers of the company and the entire company. We gather once a month, and really what that means for everybody. For example, this morning, talking to managers from across the company, I was talking about how here everybody wears what we say multiple hats, that even if you're in the production department, you also have a sales role to play, because you might be out at a restaurant buying our beer, and you can talk to the restaurant manager or the bartender about why they should carry our products. Or you can see a consumer in our beer hall when you're walking home, out at the end of the day before your shift. So, and thinking about acting like an owner as opposed to I just have my job to do, it really becomes a different mentality that people have to have, and that just takes time and training and education and inspiring people to look up from their daily tasks to realize I own this business. The word we use over and over and over again when we talk about ESOP is opportunity, which meshes well with what Chris says. It's a great American word. It's like in this life, you want to be given opportunity, then you have to work to achieve the success based on that opportunity. So here, you're an owner. Now it's up to all of us to make something of being owners. So that becomes a challenge part of it in a good way. But there's no substitute for just time, training, and repeat education on the subject.
Thank you very much. Then I will ask, you mentioned in the clip that Chris and his association is helping you a lot, and I will ask Chris later about that. But now I would like to ask Andrej something. Andrej was during the conference answering already quite a number of questions, very practical ones about finances, about legislation, and so on. I would like to ask you, now we heard how much for employee-owned companies, how much how important it is to invest in this soft part of the ownership. Are you already dealing with that? Do you have plans to do some of ownership culture, education, I don't know, change something or deal with that, Andrej? You have to unmute yourself.
Should I answer in English or how you would rather?
I don't know. That was a question Stan I wanted to resolve. I think that as majority of people are Slovenians, and we really like them to understand you. Please do a quick answer in English and a little bit longer in Slovene.
Okay, we already started with that for sure, because the soft part is really important. We established the codex of honor in the company. Now we are leaving that values which need to be present in the company all the time. And what we did it in the most of the time, we tried to teach our co-workers how ownership and the capital it all is important. So like Mr. Ellerman mentioned, we got already once the certificates, the part of the ownership of the companies, and the people in that time, they really didn't know what to do with that. They didn't understand the meaning, and now 30 years later, it's still the same, I would say, who didn't came to the position to get the part of the profit maybe at the end of the year. He was not aware that there is also other part of the incomes, yearly incomes, than the salary and bonus and normal stuff. Tako da se trudimo s kodeksom, ki smo ga sprejeli v podjetju, krepiti vrednote, po katerih bi morali v podjetju živeti, in pa nad vse se trudimo tudi nek odnos do kapitala vzpostaviti, to pa pri naših sodelavcih in pa tudi pri politikih, ker trdno verjamemo, da razdeljeni dobički ali pa vrednost kapitala, ki je v lasti slovenskih državljanov, predstavlja nekaj dobrega za državo, in nekako imamo občutek, da tudi naši politiki ne razumejo popolnoma, da lastništvo pomeni, da potem tudi dobički ostanejo resnično v državi. Ta mehek del potem nas pelje naprej seveda v neko produktivnost. To pa je čar lastništva tudi, da če nekdo računa s tem, da bo delež oziroma delnica narasla, je ob tem sigurno nujno tudi dobro delati. Ker sedaj smo kot solastniki nekako vsi v funkciji ali pa naših 56 sodelavcev, da svoj prirastek kapitalskega dobička kreirajo sami. In to lahko kreiramo samo z dobrim delom, s skrbjo za stranke in vse ostalo, kar tukaj zraven spada.
Thank you, Andrej. I will stay with you, Andrej, because one of our participants, Saša Mukic, Pureberg ask a question to you and to Harpoon as well, to Dan as well. Dan said when he was talking about Harpoon Brewery that there is a connection between quality and employee ownership, that people, consumers, see some connection, see the same idea, the same logic in having something done good and being an owner, thinking about how you are doing things. Now, the question is, do you see your business partner in the same way? So when you choose business partners, do you consider employee ownership or ownership structure of your business partners? Do other employee-owned companies have any advantage here, or you don't think about that? Andrej first, and then I would ask Dan as well the same question.
On the side, if it makes... Yeah, if you, it's from both sides. In one way, our customers are one of the most famous companies in every country, I would say, and they like it when we tell them that we are owned by the people employed in the company. This is somehow the advantage. They know that we have a sustainable setup, and of course, in high tech, when they bought something, they expect that that will be on the market also after a few years or decades. So the ownership in hands of employees give them the security that the company will not just disappear. On the other side, we don't look on that, to be honest, because like, I don't know, SpaceX or NASA in United States, or Mercedes, BMW in Germany, it's, yeah, we would like to see all of them, that the employees would be also involved, but yeah, we cannot choose that.
Maybe you will start to look at that factor as well. Then
we would not say no to the customer, which is not owned by the people.
Dan, can you answer the same question, please?
He's muted too. You're muted, Dan.
I'm muted. I got it. Sorry about that. I have two mute buttons, which is a problem. When we have done consumer research, because we sell a consumer product ultimately, every single time we have raised the subject of employee ownership and what do you think about employee ownership, we get a very, very strong positive response. Like, that indicates quality. When you watch people, you know, from behind the two-way mirror answer, they talk about, wow, the employees, their owners, they must care more about what they're making than if they were not employee owners. So we've heard that time and again. So I have to think that that's true. We sell through, you know, retailers and wholesalers in America, and I think fewer of them care, unfortunately. But the end consumer, we think, does care. So we try to talk about employee ownership a lot, like on our packaging, social media, etc. We make it very prominent that we are employee owned. For us, we don't have, like Andrej, we don't have a lot of vendors, suppliers who are employee owned. When we do have the opportunity to work with an employee owned business, we do so.
Thank you very much. I'm going through our participants' questions. Some questions were posed to Andrej regarding how they deal with people who are leaving the company and have to sell shares according to the contract with the company, and what they're doing to force them to do that. So Andrej already answered that question, but I would like David to say something about the model. So how the model deals with this problem of connecting ownership with the activity in the company.
Yeah, well, the Slovene ESOP, I mean, the American ESOP, as you heard from Dan and Jeremy, you don't see the money till you retire or leave. You don't want to incentivize people to leave just to get their payout. And so that's a artifact of the way in which the American ESOP was legislated as a carve out from pension law. And pension law, of course, you have to retire in order to get the money. So if it's a publicly traded company, you can sell the shares after you leave, but almost all ESOPs are, by far most of them are private non-listed companies. So what we suggest in the Slovene ESOP is to make the contribution from the company to the ESOP a very regular thing. See, in the American ESOP, the contribution from the company to the ESOP is tied to your leverage, to your loan. But once the loan is paid off, it stops. And it doesn't come on again until you have people leaving or retiring. And then you either get a new loan or new ESOP contributions to pay that off. And so it's a much more systematic thing if you make it a regular contribution. And that then allows you, after the loan is paid off, to start to roll over the shares. They're the oldest shares. So it runs on a first in, first out basis, essentially. And so the people that have carried the risk, as it were, the longest, have had shares the longest, they get bought out first. And then the shares are redistributed to the current employees. So if you leave, you still get paid out in that same time period. There's no stochastic event that says suddenly now you got to pay us off, we've left. You'll get your money 5 years or 8 years or whatever it is after your share was first put in the account, whether you're working there or not. So what happens when you leave is your account's closed for new shares coming in, but your old shares get bought out on a regular basis. And the same when you retire. Retire is just another way to leave the company. So that regularizes the whole thing. It just rolls over continuously over that time period. So there are no stochastic events that say suddenly you've got to, address this cash flow. You adjust the cash flows of the whole company so that you can do this. And over time, the younger generations buying out the older generation, and it all stays in the ESOP in the local community. So that's what we call the rollover plan. And it's used, by the way, in American agricultural cooperatives, for example. The payout to the members of the cooperative are called patronage dividends. And depending on your cash flow, you can't necessarily pay out patronage dividends in cash. So you have what's called retained patronage dividends, which are retained in the company and eventually paid off. And they're paid off on a first in, first out basis. So the older patronage dividends get paid off first. And we're suggesting using that system with shares instead of the patronage dividends. So it's not something that's totally new, but it is an improvement over having to wait until retirement or having to incentivize people to leave to see the money.
Thank you, David. Now, when we are talking about the model and the legislation, maybe we should think a little bit, Gregor, as you saw some of our participants ask some questions. Daniel Celofiga and Blaž Karlin asked questions about our model, our Slovenian legislation, how it is supportive to employee ownership, and what are the, if we know the answer, what are the forms and legislative supporting tax mechanisms in Slovenia compared to other European countries. Here is Austria and other countries of EU mentioned. So can you maybe answer some of these questions, Gregor?
Yeah, thank you. Slovenia, compared to other countries, has quite a limited amount of different types of legal entities, how employee ownership can be organized. Like Andrej with David Soft are doing, they're including their employees into a limited liability company. You have companies like, I think, Data Lab in Slovenia, who are a publicly traded company, who are including the employees in their ownership structure through the mechanism of basically paying out bonuses in a form of shares. This is, I think, in Slovenia, one of the only mechanisms of including employees into the ownership structure that has some tax incentives. Otherwise, like if you want to do it in a limited liability company, if you want to include people into the ownership structure, and you want the people, the employees to pay that from their bonuses, you have to first pay the bonus, pay all of the taxes, all of the social contributions, and then the employees have the net income to use for basically buying into the company. And that's in Slovenia, it's not, Slovenia doesn't have really a really good tax incentive scheme for including employees into the ownership structure. That's why I think all of the, like most of the solutions there are basically ad hoc solutions with no, and are really different from each other when it comes to structuring the transactions. We had some examples in Slovenia when they started doing like phantom shares, which is really popular in the US, where the employees are fictitiously part of the ownership structure, but they have no vote. As owners, they only have access to dividends, that's it. When comparing to other European countries, they have like some schemes to employ employees into the ownership structure. But when we're comparing to Austria, Austria doesn't have, at least to my knowledge, a tax incentive scheme to include employees into the ownership structure. There are some cases in Spain and in Italy when the state has not tax incentives, but other financing mechanisms, but they're mostly meant to finance companies that are in trouble, not successful companies. So basically that's it, what's going on in Europe. You have some funds in England that are basically meant to be a vehicle for employee ownership, but English legal system is so different from ours that it's pretty much uncomparable. Then we have our basically, how should I say, cousin institute in Sweden, which is doing like almost the same thing as us, basically preparing the legislative basis for the employee ownership, but that's mostly it when it comes to Europe.
Thank you very much, Greg. We have another question regarding this ownership culture and education about it. Jadranka Vesel, we are very veseli smo, da ste z nami, Jadranka. Jadranka Vesel is a person who has a very long history of supporting cooperatives in Slovenia. We are very glad to have you with us. So she asked us, I don't know to whom the question was addressed, if we think about educating future employee owners. If it is addressed to Institute for Economic Democracy, yes, one very important part of the Institute is devoted to education, to informing and educating for future employee owners. But there is an institution here today who has much more of experiences in that, Ownership Association. So Chris, back to you. Can you tell us a little bit more, how do you support employee-owned companies in that sense? What do you provide for them? We are looking forward to learning from you. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you are doing in US?
Sure, just a little bit. I think the way to start to answer that question is to admit that ownership is a large, complex concept. And the good news is that everyone has some sort of understanding of it. This is not it isn't necessarily a concept that belongs to the lawyers and the experts. Every citizen has some notion of what ownership means, from their daily lives and things that they own. But it is a complicated concept. So the challenge is how to break it down into digestible pieces for people to be able to understand. And very quickly, what my firm has done over the years is to first distinguish between sort of content areas within ownership that would be good to have education around. And the second is structures and ways of helping redesign organizations to allow employee owners more of a voice, more of a say. So in the first case, in terms of the content areas, we distinguish between ownership facts, ownership skills, and ownership values. Facts being the sort of legal rules of the road about how the ownership plan works. Skills being things like business and financial literacy, understanding income statements and balance sheets. Values being how to talk to each other about ownership and what does ownership mean. In particular, what are the rights and responsibilities of being an owner, and what are the risks and rewards involved in being a successful business owner. So that's content. And then underneath that, there's different ideas about structure. How can you encourage people, particularly vis-a-vis their departments and where they work every day, to take more responsibility? You're calling them owners, you're making them owners. They want to have a say. And the most relevant place to have more of a say is around their jobs and the departments that they work in. Over time, that can and should graduate to higher levels of responsibility, including boards of directors, but boards of directors themselves, which can be a controversial topic, workers can serve on those boards, or they may be, in some instances, it may be better to encourage workers to help select professionals that they interview and that they trust as lawyers and bankers and people who they think will do a good job representing them on a board, and giving them a choice along with the management team about selecting outsiders for a board. Because boards of directors should ideally be composed of a mixture of insiders and outsiders. So those are sort of different levels. There's the content, and then there's the structure distinction.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Staying with you, Chris, when you were talking and Dan were talking about this excellent success of employee ownership in Hardwood Brewery, we heard about this perfect match of their business model and existing and growing ownership culture. There are some companies that are not like that. Do you have any sort of company, any company, type of company that you will suggest not to use employee ownership, or to do something before transforming ownership into employee ownership?
Well, that's a good question. If I understand the question, Aleksandra, you're saying, what are examples of companies where it would not be necessarily a good idea to do employee ownership, or at least right away? Well, I guess I can identify, first of all, I'm a believer, so that's a hard question to answer, because I think it can make a difference in most every situation. However, we can distinguish between startup companies that have not really figured out their path yet, and where there is a sort of a complex dynamic among founders who are still putting in money and cash and trying to figure out their relationship to each other. I mean, I'm reminded, and maybe Dan could speak to it. I mean, it was the early days of Harpoon. It was employee ownership, but there were two partners, and maybe there were three. There were some other investors, I guess, that you had back then. And figuring out how to share with the employees when you're just putting the game together is complicated. And it maybe is better to initiate ownership once you have a firm that's up and running, and where you're looking down the road. So that's Roman numeral one. Roman numeral two is distress situations, you know, where the companies are truly troubled, is a falling knife, as we say in the United States. Those are situations where you don't necessarily want to do employee ownership because the business is likely to fail. So you should have some viability to be able to go forward.
Yeah, I would just add putting an ESOP on top of a bad company does not
Right.
turn that company into a good company. So if a company is poorly run or its finances are bad, putting an ESOP on it can actually make it worse. So a good company with an ESOP can be a very powerful thing. But I would say too that culture is really important in any business, and having a strong culture, I think, can help you become a successful ESOP. If you're an organization that didn't care about your employees beforehand to all of a sudden say, we're an ESOP now I'm going to start caring, you need to do more than just say that. I'd also make an important point that if anyone's out there, this is something I think they did very, very well with the legislation here, and it's very complicated, but you know, you cannot run most businesses like a democracy. It would be a disaster. We are in a very competitive industry. There are 8,500 breweries in the United States now. There were 100 breweries in the United States when we started. It's very competitive. We need to be able to make decisions and compete very effectively. And the ESOP structure allows you to continue to run your business, the board of directors, CEO, et cetera, which I think is very, very important. It doesn't change you into something that would make you unsuccessful. It allows you to have all the benefits, the economic benefits of ownership going to employees, but you're still able to move quickly, make decisions quickly, and run your business responsibly under an ESOP. So that was a very thoughtful, it's convoluted, it's the way they had to do it, but it works effectively here, I think.
Yes, you made it very clear that you are in business of doing good business, and that you have to act as in business as any other of your competitors. That is very clear, and that is very important to hear, that ownership structure will not resolve your business problems. And that is also connected to one of the main stereotypes about employee-owned companies, that there cannot be run in a normal business-like good way.
That's
and
right.
You are a proof that when well done, the ownership structure should allow and is allowing normal business to be very successful.
That's right.
Now, when we are already here talking about your success, we present you, and you are obviously a very successful company in both ways, as a business project and as an ownership project. You said that you lost a lot during the COVID crisis in business, but that your ownership structure and the whole culture of your people is helping you not to paralyze, but to find better ways to innovate, to do things in a better way. Is there anything that you can now think about as a problem, as an issue, not a problem, a challenge regarding your ownership structure or your employee ownership situation? Is there anything that you are dealing with now, currently, regarding your ownership situation?
Was that for me, Aleksandra? Yes. Yes, we are dealing with a structural problem with our ESOP. That was when we set the ESOP up 6 years ago. This is going to get way too technical, but in the negotiation between me, the ESOP, my selling partner, et cetera, we had a dividend that was part of the ESOP that was going into the ESOP every year. And what that created effectively was, because people were getting shares based off the dividend, it meant that the longer you were here, the more shares you were getting. So last year, for example, so the 5th year of our ESOP, people who'd been here for all 5 years were getting significantly more allocated shares than newly hired employees. And we never intended there to be that gap. So not to get technical, but the point I'd like to make is they are complicated, at least the way they're set up in the United States. And I don't know any way for them not to be complicated. And so pay attention to structure and decisions that you make. Hire good advisors and lawyers to kind of guide you. And then every few years, you know, check on your ESOP to make sure that it's continuing to do for you what you want it to do for you. So we're going back and we are making some changes to either get rid of that dividend or make it completely variable every year so that our ESOP is more flexible and we're able to, you know, have people receive the same level of awards every year, not different based on their years of service. So that's just one example.
Yeah, thank you. That is what I wanted to hear. So it is not done once for all. You are continuously having some issues. Yeah, you
Absolutely.
have to take into account and resolve. I'm going back to Andrej. There is a question from the audience. Mr. Znidosic is asking again about this problem of who has to sell back the shares to the company. He's asking if it would be a good thing that retired employees hold a part, at least a part of their own ownership of their shares as part of securing their position, because he thinks our state is not taking good care of our pensioners. So that is a question from the audience. Andrej.
Yes, somehow in theory, then in 100 years, the ownership is more in the hands of the people which are not involved in the company anymore. This is why we somehow made a decision that by the contract itself, we put it in that when the working relationship is gone, or if one of the co-owners died, then the official, the family and whoever got the shares need to sell it back to the company. And we made all the possible scenarios that the part is always, the part of the ownership always is returned back to the mother company. This is also, because of that, we also didn't want to change the legal organization of the company, because we didn't want to open the market that the people can sell and buy shares between each other. We made it in the way that the company is a market maker, and the people can buy it from the company, and company is in every moment prepared to buy the shares back. So if somebody wants to buy it, he needs to wait half a year for the new buying window. But if somebody decides to sell it by the contract, we made the obligation to the company that immediately the money is paid out. So we really made the half of the things just to protect the company, that the owners could be out of the company. We believe that financial owner somehow is then the best, the worst what could happen, because we are really orientated to the development and we share the profit, but smaller part, because we would like to be involved in developments, and the financial owners usually they don't support that with the full power, for sure.
Thank you, Andrej. And maybe it should be said that in good companies like yours and like Harpoon, when people sell back their shares, they're getting nice sums of money. So that is also helping them in their after active life in pension. I will now start the last round of questions, and this is the last call for questions to our participants who are still with us. I don't want to leave them. In around 15 minutes we are done with our panel, and please, all four of us, think about some last points you would like to make after I ask my last questions. So Andrej, still my question to you is connected to the fact that you are one of the most prominent promoters of employee ownership in Slovenia now. And you are talking about not only about to us who are believers, as Chris said, but to other businessmen, to other managers in Slovenian business community. What are the reactions? What are their questions? How they respond to this very loud promotion of employee ownership from your side?
Yes, I have a feeling that when we have a business-related visits, because from different kind of congress, then we promise to visit each other. And when we came to the ownership program, which we have usually is the reaction that they would also like to have it, but they don't want to start it because it's so annoying and complicated. And then we, of course, explain how we did it, but we are not really a promoter, just that what we did it is the right way how to do it. Any way where the people can become the owners, we support it absolutely. This is the different community or how we did it, it's not so important, but they would like to have it. And also we saw the results of our promotion somehow, because some of the companies, they gave us a lot of questions, and they also started the programs based on what we did it in the last 5-6 years. We saw also that to start the ownership program, the company need to be in a specific size. If it's too small, then the values, the money-wise, the values are different, and it's hard to make a really long-term model. But when the value of the company is big enough, then of course it's easier to grow on ownership. Number of members, and also we could grow with the part which is in the hands of the employees. Nevertheless, at the end, we plan to sell the whole company to the employees.
That is almost a very nice last sentence, but you will have still the possibility to say some final few words yourself. I have just one remaining question to David, and there is a almost remaining question from Boštjan Juric that is connected to the same thing. So I wanted to ask David, David, you are a big supporter for many years of employee ownership in very different settings, in very different countries, from America to Scandinavia to Eastern Europe and so on. What are the main universal challenges or supporting factors to employee ownership in general? And is there something that is specific, we are in Slovenia, that is specific in Slovenia, what we, according to your opinion, should take into account? That is my question. And the question of Mr. Juric is regarding that I spoke in my part about this neoliberal dominant discourse, how likely is that while this is a dominant structure, we will see more of employee ownership growing?
Okay. Certainly one of the neoliberal mentality, part of it is, as I found out in the World Bank, is that a lot of people just oppose the whole idea of employee ownership because they think of it not just as ownership of managers, but also ownership of blue-collar employees, and they just think they're the wrong type of people. And they're not, so it's basically a prejudice. And, you know, when I failed to get the Menziger privatization law passed here, in part due to opposition, well, from Jeff Sachs and a lot of Slovene immigrants that had come back and wanted to restore everything like it was back in 1945. The World Bank was also involved. And so I worked for 10 years in the World Bank and worked on attempts to have privatization in other countries, the former Soviet Union, to all the people that worked in the firm. And there was just enormous prejudice against it by the staff of the World Bank and the official, I should say, the higher up staff. And when Joe Stiglitz came and I became his advisor, we tried to turn things around, but it was too late. That was 1997. And so there was a historical period there where there was a very open opportunity to have more of it. And it was just opposed by neoliberal attitudes and basic prejudice against the wrong sort of people having ownership. And those attitudes change slowly. So we have, in the Institute, we're really focusing on the pragmatic problems of transition, the pragmatic problems of, one partner wants to leave and the other one, as in Dan's case, it's not a family transition, but you've got to buy out one of the partners, then this is a mechanism for that. And that turns out to be even a greater problem in Western Europe, because so many firms in Western Europe started after World War II, and the owners are now really almost into retirement. And this is called the Silver Tsunami. So it's the tidal wave of silver-haired people, thinking, what the hell are we going to do with our company? Because my kids want to go to the bright lights of the big cities. If I sell it to competitors, it'll be shut down. And I want to sell it to my employees, but they don't have the money. And so that's the really the pragmatic situation that we're focusing on right now, and both in Eastern Europe and in Western Europe.
We seem to have lost Aleksandra here.
Yeah, Greg, do you want to take over, or Tay?
Good evening. Okay, so Aleksandra has some problems with her internet connection, so I'll take over. Basically, we are in the final stages of the event, and I would just maybe, as Aleksandra wanted to do, take all of your last words on the topic, on building a Slovenian model and so forth. And maybe we could start with Dan and Chris.
Certainly. Let me just say I'm honored to be here, and I'm so admire the work you're all doing to try to make this happen. And we have we're 30 or 40 years into this in the United States, and we still have a marketing problem promoting ESOP. So this is not a new challenge, but I just applaud all of you. It's worth the fight. It's I believe very much in our system of, free enterprise. And I think this is the logical way for it to go, and sharing the proceeds of this wonderful system with our employees. So if I can be of any help to any of you, if you're ever coming through Boston or New England, please stop by the brewery and look me up and have a beer. And I promise to do the same when I come to Slovenia to tour some breweries soon.
I'm so glad that I'm back and that I heard this. I'm sorry that I didn't hear David. My internet connection just failed. Where are we, Tay?
If I could say two last sentences, maybe. I would like to see that in Slovenia, the government made the law that the tax regulations will be different for the companies where the people are owners. And maybe just for the small owners, that they will not support if they believe that the big owners are the rich people, whatever, they could also skip it. But for the small owners, they should do something special to promote that and push them to be more involved in the ownership. This is about all the rest, I believe, that I said before. But just the last sentence, really, Daniel, not far away from the company where, not far away from Devesov, is the beer fountain. I would be really glad to invite you there. How that looks like, I don't want to tell you, because I would like that your imagination will do the rest.
I am imagining now, and I say yes, I'll see you there. Thank you.
Thank you all. Did we hear all four panelists' last words? Not yet.
Just say a quick thing. I think I would maybe leave this conversation urging our friends in Slovenia to not get trapped into the political dilemma of framing this as an issue just for the righteous left or the righteous right. And I understand the critique of neoliberalism that you're talking about, and that's a longer discussion. But one of the virtues of this idea, why it's worked in the United States, is that it is not coming from one end of the ideological spectrum. That people are able to find ways to connect to this idea from different places, and so that you need to figure out how to connect to your political parties according to their best, what's best in their traditions, whatever they are, because this idea should be able to connect to honest people regardless of their political party.
That is very wise, and we are in the middle of that kind of discussion here.
Good.
David, do you want to say some final words?
I just wanted to add that we've had a series of seminars or webinars sponsored by Spirit Slovenia, and on a lot of the details on ownership culture, on the ESOP. Chris did one or several, and these are taped and these are available on our Institute website. So people want to go further into the details, there's a whole bunch of webinars that they can take a look at.
Thank you very much. Now it is my duty to say goodbye to all of you, to thank you for all the contributions, for panelists. Thank you very much. A round of applause to all of you. I'm thanking also to all the people who are still with us, not a small number regarding the length of our conference. So we did a good job, and I'm really, really looking forward to the continuation, both in Slovenia, in the US, and being in contact in all possible ways. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.